Hey, good morning, good evening, good lunchtime, whatever it is, wherever you are. Welcome to sunny Edinburgh and to ITSM Explorers, where today we're going to be looking at ITSM Tool Selection. And for those of you who haven't been along before, this is a live stream. We really do want you to interact with us, so you can use the comments, drop in and tell us where you are in the world and what your name is, and we'll give you a shout out on screen. And if you've got any questions as we go through or any comments, just drop them there in the comments and we can bring them on the screen live, and you can divert the flow of the stream, so to speak. So it is totally live and we do want to interact with you. So if you're out there, we can't see you until you add something into the comments. So please do that as we go along, and we can have a little chat. But let's talk about what we got for you today and what's coming up. So this is a first in a series of shows that we've got lined up for you. So it's not just one, it's not two, it's not three, it's 4 different shows associated with ITSM Tool Selection. It's a big topic. We can talk on it for hours and hours, and we probably will. There'll probably be 4 hours worth of discussion on this topic. So today we're going to start with some helpful tips at the beginning of your journey. So things that you might want to consider before you even look at approaching vendors or look at any of the tools in detail. Then next time round, I'm on holiday next week, so it'll be the week after. It's the ultimate mind map. So about 200 features on a mind map. And I will tell you now, there'll be a whole load of features on that mind map that you never knew you could ask for. So that is going to be a great tool for shortcutting the whole process. So you don't have to sit there and think about what are all the different things that we need to have from a tool. It's all on a giant mind map. You can choose to reprioritize as you want to, but it's a great time saver and a great cost saver in terms of thinking, and it makes sure you're not going to miss anything out as well. Then we've got an episode called The Shopping Cart Deals. Now that's where we're going to let you into a few secrets of how salesmen operate, how pre-sales people operate, and how you might want to get or change your behavior to get some better deals for yourself. So there's a load of good commercial stuff in that particular episode. Then we're going to go do another one called The Flying Start Show. And that's based upon my co-host Steve's recent presentation at SITS, where he looked at transitioning to a new service desk tool and all the things that you want to have a heads up on so that you're prepared for that transition. So, for example, I think one of the favorite questions is, should I take over all of my old call data to my new system? We will answer that and many, many more different questions when we get to that episode. But being as I've just mentioned Steve, let's bring him in.
Hello.
Steve, welcome to the show. So I think what we ought to do is a brief intro to everybody, for those who don't know us, as to why they might want to listen to us in terms of ITSM Tool Selection. So I'll kick off. I've been in ITSM since the 80s, believe it or not. And I started off on the service desk, and I've had millions of jobs since then that are all related around ITSM, including working for 3 different service management vendors. So I know the inside track on selecting tools. I know exactly what the salespeople and the pre-sales people are going to do. I then, in my later career, started running IT service management events. This means that I have seen every single product that you could possibly think of at my events. So I've got a very wide knowledge of all the products you could possibly think of. I can watch a product demo and tell you where they're going next and point out why they're going in a particular direction, and give you all the strengths and weaknesses of just about any product that is out there. So that's the side of the fence that I have sat on. I have been through hundreds of implementations with loads and loads of different customers, always on the vendor side of things. So I've not been on the person who actually has to, buy the tool and deliver it. I've been on the other side of the fence. Steve.
Other side of the fence, aren't I? So, mid-80s, starting in technology as Martin, working on the service desk as Martin did, but then taking more of a client-side consulting role, trusted advisor, helping organizations build out their IT operating models, their processes, and in particular then, automating those within service management tools. So helping them with requirements, helping them understand what's available on the market, who they should be talking to, and as an independent consultant, no axe to grind either way, have a kind of clear view across the landscape, and then more recently getting involved in, as you've already mentioned there, Martin, some of the big implementations of ITSM tools, and therefore picked up a few war stories and hints and tips along the way, which I'm really looking forward to sharing with our viewers today.
Well, we'll be sharing at least 10 helpful tips,
Indeed.
and they're all collated nicely on Steve's website as well. We'll come to that in the end. But before we start off with the helpful tips, I wanted to do this. I said we may be, in some of the trailers approaching this event, exploding a few myths. So I'm going to start off with one or two, and we can talk between the two of us about these probably for several hours just on this statement and the next one I've got coming up. But this is the most common statement I always hear, which is ITSM tools are all the same. Being as we've both been around since the mid-80s, time for a quick history lesson. So back in around about the year 2000, we started to see tools come along which were specifically for ticketing and service desks. And they took off very, very quickly because before that, it was all databases, spreadsheets, things like that.
Yeah.
Then around about 2007, ITIL v3 launched. And what happened then was every vendor that was out there started to align their products with ITIL v3. And for the forthcoming 5 to 10 years, maybe, nearly all ITSM tools did become the same. So if you're going to turn the clock back a fair way, then that's probably a true statement. But what happened after that was SaaS came along, the cloud came along, Agile and DevOps came along, the ability to work with things like ITOM and event management solutions came along. And as a result of that, what happened was that the service desk tools all started to diversify. And the end result is there's a lot out there and they do a lot of different things. Do they all do instant problem change, service portal, service request? Yeah, so that's a given. However, what they can do beyond that definitely puts them into different categories. So I get totally blown away every time that I look at a Boston grid. There's a few out there from very famous names on the planet. But when they put something like Top Desk, which is a perfectly good tool for ticketing, on the same Boston grid as ServiceNow, which is a total enterprise tool, which you can use for running a internet banking operation. NatWest, for instance, I know use ServiceNow, and they're using governance, risk, compliance, portfolio management, loads of ITOM solutions, everything that you can possibly think of. That is not the same as being Top Desk, and it's not the same price. So if you're sitting on a very tall stool, you're in trouble when the ServiceNow pricing comes in. because you're going to fall off your chair and it's a long way down. But that's not to say that it can't work for a lot of organizations. It does. And it can be a fantastic, fantastic tool. But to put the two on the same grid, I think is utter madness. I talk too much. I hate Boston grids. Over to you, Stephen.
No, I think you're quite right. You know, you've got to compare apples with apples, right? You know, I've just gone out and bought myself a car, and you wouldn't go and even think about comparing a bottom of the range Fiesta with a McLaren road car. You know, they're two different things for two different purposes, and I think that's the point that you're trying to get across is, you know, if you just want a ticketing tool, then it's unlikely that a big enterprise tool like ServiceNow would be the right answer just from an economics perspective. Functionally, it would do what you wanted it to do, but as would a whole bunch of others that feature perhaps less prominently on those Boston matrices that you were referring to there, because they're less feature rich. But for a lot of organizations, that works just right. So I don't know. I think I often deal with organizations who take great comfort from the fact that their shortlist are the top tool, the tools on the top right-hand corner of the very latest Boston Matrix that's been published. And that's not necessarily always the right answer. In fact, you could choose a tool that wasn't on one of those matrices, and there are a good few of those out there that are very, very good tools. So yeah, I just take it all with a pinch of salt, guys. These tools are different and they serve different purposes.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness to the grid, I'm going to say probably don't choose one in the bottom left-hand corner. But anywhere else on the grid, you're probably all right. And if it's not on the grid at all, don't worry. There are some vendors out there who really, oh, I can think of a couple that I'll not mention the names of, but they don't pay to play, as they would call it. They don't want to be in the grid. They feel that that is not a true representation of the world. And I would agree with them to some degree. At this point, we should put out the statement. These opinions are mine and Steve's only, and not relating to any company. So don't come and sue us. We're just giving you our opinions. Go check with the vendors themselves if you want to get an alternative viewpoint to our viewpoint. So on this topic as well, I'm going to throw out a couple of names about other vendors that are out there, because I think there are differentiators beyond the core ITSM elements on grids. So if you've got somebody like Ivanti, they've got brilliant stuff to do with security and patch management and geofencing, all sorts of fancy stuff like that. So if somebody came to me and their big goal was security, I'd probably be saying, well, have a look at Ivanti. If somebody came to me and they said, I'm a managed service provider, I'd probably be saying, look at ForMe, because they're really a unique offering in that particular space for that particular function. But, you know, it's totally variable. I don't think they should all be on the same grid. So that's the message. All ITSM tools are not the same, guys. They haven't been for at least 15 years. So if anybody says to you they're all the same, then they're not. Next. This is another common phrase which I see all the time, and that is process beats features. So there are people out there who will tell you that there's nothing wrong with the tool you've got. You can re-engineer your processes and everything will be fine. My take on that may be slightly different from Steve's, because I'm probably a features guy and Steve's maybe more of a process guy. But my take on this is, and people will say, no, don't make your purchase based upon features. Well, to me, if I want to engineer a process, let's say major incident management, and within that process, I want to have links to Microsoft Teams, SMS messages being sent out, automatic scheduling, not only within my company, but beyond my company, and to record all of that into one single call. If you don't have the features to do that, you can't adjust your process. So if your tool does not support your processes, your process can be brilliant, but it just won't work because the features are not there. So for me, these two go hand in hand, and I could pick out a bunch more. The chatbots is another good one. If you've got a process that involves a chatbot and you don't have a chatbot, how on earth are you going to do anything with that process? So these features go hand in hand with processes. Anybody who says, oh, I can totally change everything just using processes, if you've got an older tool, the chances are you can't. There will be newer tools out there which have got fabulous features that you didn't know you could have that will dramatically improve your process. Now, I think you have a take on that as well in terms of processes and changing tools and why people might want to change tools, etc.
Yeah, I think, often you see that people want to change the tool because the perception that the tool isn't doing the right thing for them, when actually it's just been poorly implemented. So I think that is something which organizations need to be mindful of, and often, changing tool is the right answer under those sorts of circumstances. But in terms of process, I think what you want to be doing, and we'll come on to requirements and the importance of requirements later, but I think that you want to be able to be informing your process design activity and your tool selection activity in parallel with one another, such that your process informs your requirements, and your requirements for the tool and its functionality inform the processes. I don't think you can sit in a darkened room and define your processes on their own, nor can you define your requirements or do a tool selection, which is, why some implementations might fail, I guess, because of lacking that connection between the two, and you fall in love with the demo that you've seen from the vendor with not really an understanding of how you're going to make that real within your own organization and make it align with your processes. I nearly just found myself going down a big rabbit hole, Martin, about, well, how do you manage the business change that's necessary to transform the processes to capitalize on the tools? But maybe that's a whole conversation for a bit later on.
I think it probably is, because I'm about to go down various different rabbit holes and just realize that we've got time and an agenda to try and hit as much as possible.
Yeah, we'll do our best. We never do. I don't even know why we try, but we this is, for those of you watching this is planned. There is some structure behind it. It's just that often we find ourselves enticed by these little rabbit holes, and we will go down them. If you want us to move along, or you want us indeed to go down one of the rabbit holes, use the comments underneath and give us some direction to save us meandering through these. So yeah, move us along, Martin, before we find ourselves down the rabbit hole.
Let me happily do that. Next scene. So nearly 20 minutes in, and we're about to start talking about the 10 useful tips.
We'll get through them.
Well, most of these have come from you. So I get to ask the questions and you get to answer them. And then occasionally I'll disagree or ask another question. So understanding stakeholder requirements. Let's start with that.
Yeah. So if you go out to buy anything, you're going to have in your mind a view of what you want, right? Some broad requirements, except it seems for ITSM tools. And there's so many organizations will say, well, first step in the process is obviously to get some demos. And you're like, well, what are you buying and who are you talking to? You do need a core set of requirements. And I've seen this done to varying degrees of detail. Think of it a little bit like a pyramid, I guess, in that the tip of the pyramid should contain the most important things to you functionally. And then as you go down, you can define more detail if you wish. I've been in an organization recently where there were 10 core requirements. I worked in an organization a couple of years ago where there was about 190 requirements. It was horses for courses. It worked for that particular organization. They scored against every requirement. I guess the point being is begin with the end in mind. Define what you want the tool to do, and then score against those requirements. This doesn't have to be A-level science in terms of its complexity, but start with what you want and measure the tool against those requirements. Don't start with a tool, then re-engineer some requirements, and then try and retrospectively remember what you thought the core elements were of that particular tool. And we'll come on to requirements again later when we talk about demonstrations as well, and driving the content of demos yourself rather than just letting the sales guys come in and deliver their own preset script. Because I know that you and I have strong feelings about that one, Martin. But that's the core message, really, around requirements. Don't go shopping until you know what you want.
I'm going to add something to that and that is really make sure that you engage your key stakeholders, not just a small team within IT, but the wider IT team and your customers, your end users. Make sure that you engage them all throughout the process. A representative group or something like that is great. I have seen this happen 100 times where IT decide on a tool, IT implement it, and nobody knows anything about it until it arrives, and then there's a kickback. They don't like it, or you've missed something out, or something like that, because you didn't involve the stakeholders at stage one. So it sounds like an obvious thing to say, but I've seen it so many times, and nearly always, if you implement while everybody else is in the dark, it fails. So at least it doesn't go down well. Let's put it that way. So
you need a comms plan at the beginning. Tell them what you're going to do it, and then tell them what you're doing, so that you've got that whole engagement and buy-in, and also that you're not prioritizing a functional requirement which the end users don't want. So I've seen massive bits of work done around configuration management being big requirements in tooling, for example. The mythical CMDB, Martin. You'd know it actually from coming from Scotland. It's a bit like the Loch Ness Monster. Everyone's talked about it, but not very many people have seen one. And you see that prioritized really often. And actually, you talk to the support engineers and they say, well, we've got a perfectly good knowledge management system. All right, it's in SharePoint, but is it a priority for us to build out a CMDB? Well, it isn't right now, and in today's infrastructure, arguably, it isn't particularly necessary or achievable. So I think that's a good example of just, having some requirements, but making sure the stakeholders are bought into them.
Yeah. And I think we probably, that was a rabbit hole we just opened up, the discussion between the moving cloud environment and what's achievable and what's not achievable, and building your business models against CMDBs. But we'll leave that to later because we'll never get through. Explain to me what non-functional elements are in terms of an ITSM tool selection process.
So the best example I can think of this is, if you look at it from an ITIL perspective, you talk about things like availability, reliability, security, and all these elements will influence your non-functional requirements. But the best example in the context of ITSM tools is, from an infrastructure perspective, is it permissible for you to buy a SaaS product? Is it desirable for you to have a SaaS product? Is it mandated that you should have a SaaS product? That, as a non-functional requirement, will drive quite a lot of your tool selection activity, because there'll be tools. When I think about tool selection, we might even come on to this later in more detail, but I always think of the Guess Who game, the one with the little tags that are all up, and then you say, has your one got a beard? No, he hasn't. You flick them down. Well, in the case of ITSM tools, they're all little tabs on that board, and you say, well, is it, can it do SaaS? Oh, no, it can't. Right, those ones go then. And I think that, is a good example, but you will have all kinds of issues that you'll need to consider non-functionally in terms of the security policy that you need to apply to the tooling, data sovereignty can be a big issue. So all those things need to be considered. They're not necessarily functional requirements in terms of how you want the tool to work, but they're non-functional requirements in terms of how that tool is hosted, managed, delivered, etc. So that's that differentiation, and you must give that some consideration, or you'll find yourself implementing a tool which your security team, for example, may say, no, we can't do that because it doesn't support this standard for data transmission or something like that. And you find yourself in a bit of a hole. So best to consider those requirements up front.
Yeah, I'm going to throw in a little bit of extra on top of that as well. And that is related to what you just said in terms of where the data's stored and things like that. And this may be a surprise to some people, but not all SaaS implementations are the same. Okay. Historically, what happened was a big company, ServiceNow, came out with SaaS, and then everyone else decided they needed that because it was selling well. And a whole bunch of them then took client server apps and stuck web front ends on them and stuff like that, and then pretended it was SaaS. And then a whole bunch of people a bit later started hosting things themselves, pretending that that was also SaaS. And that still goes on a lot. You quite often will find when you look into the detail of SaaS that people are actually hosting it on their own infrastructure. That's number one. Okay. So that is something to look out for. Where is it hosted? Is it on effectively Rackspace or something like that, where they do penetration testing and it's fully scalable and all of those sort of things? A secure environment where you could, run two banking infrastructures next to one another because it's a proper SaaS environment. The other one I'm going to throw in is multi-tenancy SaaS. Okay. So two basic elements there, really. You get some SaaS products which require to be upgraded individually. So really what you're doing is you're having your own instance hosted, albeit software as a service, but it's your own instance that's hosted. Whereas other products, they upgrade themselves automatically. So if you think of, I don't know, LinkedIn or something, you never go and upgrade LinkedIn. It just gets changed. Well, that's what happens with multi-tenancy SaaS. So it depends what you want, but don't think that just because it says SaaS on the box that they're all the same, because that's three different sorts that I've just mentioned there. So
yeah, good point.
We better not go down that technical rabbit hole any further, but there are at least three different types of SaaS. Do not think it's either SaaS or on-prem. There are multiple versions of SaaS. They are not all the same. Don't interview any vendors. Why not?
Just back to the earlier point around requirements, really. So understand what it is you want to do before you then go and interview all your vendors, because if you can easily find yourself too far subsumed into the sales process without being adequately prepared. It's worthwhile doing some research. Go to some trade shows. We mentioned SITS at the top of the show, the Service Desk and IT Support Show. There are others, but SITS is probably one of the best. The Service Desk Institute run similar kind of events. Get yourselves along to those to give you an understanding of the various tools and their capabilities, but don't get the formal sales process kicked off until you know what your requirements are, both functionally and non-functionally, because they'll just run rings around you, and you'll find yourself going after the shiny thing. You'll say, oh, that one looked great, so let's implement that. Requirements? Oh no, don't worry about them. We'll just go with the shiny thing that we've just saw there because that looked incredible, and I'm really confident it will meet all of our requirements that aren't documented and you haven't scored them against. Can you see the error of your ways potentially?
Yeah, and I think we could go around in circles there as well, because people will try and sell you the moon as well. So they will sell you something which is a wonderful vision for the future, which their product can deliver, that you didn't want. But you then get diverted to this new shiny vision, And what they failed to tell you is the new shiny Vision costs about 20 times as much as your budget was originally, because it includes every single bell and whistle on their
Yes.
whole product set and all of the additional modules, which are extra cost. We better move on to the next one, Steve, or the next
Yeah, we
three.
better have.
Score against your requirements. Now, I think that's quite an interesting one, to score against your requirements rather than anybody else's method of what is good for you. So what's your angle on scoring against your requirements?
So scoring generally, I've already alluded to, right? So scoring doesn't have to be science. I typically use something along the lines of a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 doesn't really meet the requirement and 5 meets it. You can define a more detailed scaling description within each of those if you wish. But have a scoring mechanism that you score against those requirements when you're talking to the vendor. And this comes back to the point I made a little bit earlier on, Martin, in terms of the content that the vendor delivers to you during the demo should be based upon your requirements. So it enables you to compare apples with apples. If you get 3 vendors in to do a demo with no predefined scripting or requirements on your side, you'll get 3 demos which are very, very difficult to compare side by side. You need to have that broad understanding of the requirements that you want, maybe even fairly detailed understanding, but as a minimum, a broad understanding of them. And then you tell the vendor what those requirements are, and they come in to deliver against those requirements to enable you to do your scoring. I just find comparing apples with apples across different service providers is so difficult, almost impossible, unless you've done this core set of things up front. So my advice would be, don't get them to come and demo logging an incident, a problem, and a change through a workflow, for example, because all the tools do that. But think about some of your more complex requirements that you have. For example, you might have handing off from a chatbot to a live chat into a live ticket that goes to a support person, etc. So more workflow based requirements and score against those.
I have another tip to add in here.
Go for it.
It's a similar sort of thing. Whatever you do, don't have black and white yes, no tick boxes when you do your scoring, right? There are loads of vendors out there who have produced features and functionality specifically so that they can check a tick box to say yes. For instance, you mentioned a chatbot. That's a good one. So I know there's a number of products on the market who've got a tick against a chatbot because that's one of the requirements that they know is going to appear. When you look in more detail, you find out the chatbot's actually a third-party tool and plugin that you have to pay extra for, and isn't actually anything to do with the vendor at all. They just created an API and they've got the chatbot plugged in. It doesn't work particularly well. All of the details don't come through. You can't add attachments to it. The chat doesn't drop into the actual stream of the incident. All of those sort of things. It turns out they've got a tick for chatbot, but it doesn't really do hardly anything. So another one I can think of was marketplace. Now, a couple of the vendors out there, 2, 3, I can think at least 3, have got big marketplaces of APIs and standard apps that you can plug in to your tool. Some of them are brilliant. There's fantastic. I can't stress how useful that is if you've got a good marketplace. But I can think of one vendor in particular who has a tick for the marketplace. And I went and had a look at all of the tools they've got in the marketplace. There were hardly any that I recognized in terms of well-known names. I'm expecting to see, Microsoft Teams and AWS and things like that. There was hardly anything. And then I looked at the scoring because, you rate your different apps and they had different scores. The most popular one that they'd got was the ability to change the profile of their support desk to a Christmas theme.
Hmm.
And I just thought, that's the most popular app in your store. Okay. Clearly, you're going to
Says a lot.
score 5 out of 100 for that particular element. So
Hmm.
my tip would be put a weighting against the importance of it, but also against the functionality. So just because there's a tick in the box, we've got a chat box, we've got a marketplace, whatever it is, don't believe that that's going to be everything until you've seen it, and weigh your scoring accordingly, because it's just, otherwise you're under a world of trouble. Lots of those have actually been designed specifically because they know public sector tenders will come out with exactly that, a big
Yes,
list
indeed.
of ticks.
Yeah.
Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Oh, we've got one of those, we've got one of those. All right, we're in, and we're cheaper than other people. We've won the deal. Great. Get the software. Turns out it's a big letdown because it doesn't do what you thought it was going to do. So be
Indeed.
really, really careful scoring your requirements, not to fall into that trap. Tell us about your softer side, Steve.
Everyone's got to have a softer side, Martin. I guess the implementation of an ITSM tool is like any other change program, and for some reason, it seems to escape from all the core disciplines of business change that we'd apply to anything else. So it's all, and it gets worse because the more requirements you have, the more your ITSM tool feeds into the enterprise, the more it's going to impact people. But yet it seems to be the thing that's forgotten more than anything. So let's go over some fundamentals of business change and make sure you're doing this for your tool selection. So identify your stakeholders. We've already talked about that earlier on. You'll have some end users, you'll have some support teams, you'll have some suppliers. Each of those people need to be understood who they are, and they need to be communicated to. And the impact of the change that you're doing needs to be assessed for each of those stakeholder groups so that you can determine how much you want them involved and how much you need them involved. So that when the tool comes along, you avoid well, it's not invented here. We never fed into the requirements. We've never seen this tool in our life. Or we're already talking to ServiceNow. Why are you talking to this provider? So your stakeholders need to be brought in to the process and understood along the way. And it will help, as I've alluded to there, to drive adoption. So when you eventually do the big fanfare that says our new tool is going live, you should have, by that point, generated a bit of excitement and some interest and some feeling amongst people that they've been involved in the development of the tool, such that they're really excited about using it, rather than the implementation of a new tool, which is often met by, oh, well, we didn't know anything about that. We're not going to change. We're just going to continue to use this tool, and you'll just have to manually rekey all of our tickets. Says some obscure support team that sits somewhere that only handles a very small proportion of tickets, but is going to be a right pain in the backside for you if you don't get them on board. So it's like any other business change program. Adopt the core principles that you have under any business change, but do it for your ITSM tool. Have a comms plan, stakeholder groups, business change impact assessment, and have a strategy that you're then executing to bring it about.
Let me give you an example of that. I know of a company, very large organization actually, and the implementation was, I think, £1.2 million. It was a big implementation. They created a wonderful project team, and the project team was all assigned various different roles, including process owners. They kind of swallowed the ITIL 3 handbook at the time, gave everybody the title of instant process owner or whatever. All of these processes were created in the dark, okay, away from anybody else. Just the project team did it all.
Yeah.
When they completed the project, they actually won awards for how good it was. It was that good. It was brilliant. They immediately then dissolved the project team and threw it over the wall to ops who'd never seen it before, who had no training on it, who didn't own any of the processes, and didn't understand anything. That whole thing fell apart within a couple of years because nobody knew what they were doing with it. Nobody had ownership, and the project team had just been dissolved directly after the implementation was completed. So these sound like obvious things. It happens. Don't do it. Okay.
There's another thing there. You brought up a really interesting point there, Martin. Rabbit hole alert, everybody. I won't stick on this for too long, but the support of the tool. So when I talked about non-functional requirements earlier on, that's actually a really good thing for you to consider. So do you want a small group of people in your organization who are going to be responsible for maintaining the tool, doing the upgrades, doing any enhancements or whatever? Or are you going to expect that that's managed for you by a managed service provider? And if so, then whatever tool you choose needs to have someone there who can provide that managed service for you. More and more organizations are adopting that managed service approach because they just don't want to maintain the skills in-house. And often a managed service provider can be a lot more nimble in terms of providing rapid turnaround of requirements because they're not balancing other things. So yeah, it's a really good one to consider up front, is how you actually want the tool to be managed and whether you want your own staff to do it or third party.
Yeah, and I think that's quite a big decision. So you want to be making that at the start.
You do. Yeah.
Other things, I think we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but check your tools for relevant assurances. And I'm guessing this refers to where you're keeping your data, and I don't know if it's health records or financial records or things like that. There might be some sort of financial regulations or something associated that you need to make sure you're good with. Is that where that's coming from?
Yeah, the big one is GDPR, really. So any personally identifiable information in your data model. Oh God, I'm nearly going to go down a data model rabbit hole, Martin, and I'm not going to. But it's really important that before you start, you have a record of a design for what you're going to store in your ITSM tool, and the term given to that generally is a data model. And why that's important is you can then conduct assurance against it. So, for example, I once worked in a very critical nuclear facility in the UK, where the addresses of the offices on the nuclear site where some of the more volatile materials were being held was not something that you'd want to store in your cloud-based ITSM tool with data transferring backwards and forwards about that. Likewise, you might not want personally identifiable information of people who are working in those operational nuclear areas, because again, names, addresses, telephone numbers, dates of birth, contact details for them of any type would be something perhaps that would be very risky if it fell into the wrong hands. So there's a couple of elements to this assurance. There's making sure that the tool you want has the relevant compliance and governance approaches to data so that you can control it appropriately. You can encrypt it, for example. Where is it being stored? Is UK data being stored at some weird, wonderful data center in Copenhagen somewhere, or outside of the EU even, where different regulations apply? So there's a lot to consider there, but you want to be ensuring that the tool is able to meet your minimum data requirements. Comes back earlier on to the earlier comment around non-functional requirements. And you may also take some comfort from the fact that the tool could have its own badges already, such as ISO 27001, for example, in a security standard, or others that would give you at least some reassurance that the tool meets a minimum standard. And that's often something you can take great comfort from.
I think it's definitely worth having on the list. I'm guessing that I guess most people in those sort of industries already know that they should do stuff along those lines, but don't forget about it. Next.
It's never obvious. Never obvious.
Now, there's a couple here that we're actually going to come back to in more detail in the later shows. However, the top one here I know is something that both Steve and I are ultra enthusiastic about. So if we mention it today and then mention it again, forgive us, because it's really, really important to develop user stories and to not let a vendor just go and do their standard demo. So I can tell you, having watched a million demos, there are some that I can literally predict, right, they're now going to go to the knowledge base where they will start typing in a call, and it will be printer problems. And immediately the knowledge base is going to leap back up with the exact answer that that person is looking for. And it will fire up a little diagram, a lovely looking little diagram of unblocking the HP 250 inkjet printer, because that's exactly what the person was looking for, having just typed in printer problem. In the real world, you've got hundreds of printers. They are all by different manufacturers. There could be 1,000 different printer problems, but in that demo, they give the impression you're going to get straight to this lovely animated solution to what you're looking for just by typing in printer problems. Not the real world, right? Doesn't happen. Similar one, another one of my favorites, and I even think the organization I'm partnering with, they do this as well. You look up your service catalog, and lo and behold, there's a lovely looking MacBook Pro that you can order. You can click on a button, you can say how big you want your disk drive to be, how much RAM you want it in, what operating system you want, etc., etc., etc. That doesn't happen, right? In the real world, that does not happen. If you want a new computer, then you go to IT, they choose the spec of what you're going to get, and you may well get a hand-me-down from somebody else who's got a better spec machine, and the guy at the top of the organization will get the newer machine. But they've sold you the dream. If you buy this product, then everybody in the department can go and order MacBook Pros and iPhone 14 Maxes and whatever else that they want from the service catalog. And these are fixed demos based on dreams. So give us some examples of user-aligned stories which are more real.
Cool, thanks. Put me on the spot there. So think about your own organization. So managed service organization, for example, that a user phones in, they're not sure what the device is even called, they haven't got the serial number for it in front of them, they need a field service engineer to go out there, and the user story needs to be able to describe almost like your worst case workflow within your organization, such that the vendor can demonstrate how they're going to overcome it. Don't always develop a user story for what I refer to as the happy path. Think about some of those things that occur in your organization, and it can be, we're concentrating on incident tickets here, Martin, but, and requests, but we can, you should think perhaps around things like change workflow, or managing assigning a ticket to a third party who isn't on your tool, and how that work process is managed. You can think creatively about these to make sure that you're really putting the tool through its paces. It's a bit like taking a car on a test drive and never getting out of first gear otherwise, isn't it? You're never gonna really feel whether that's the right vehicle for you, because you're not really fully stress tested.
Yeah, and I think something like major incident management, I think that's quite a good one, because it just touches so many different areas, including the actual logging of the incident, but also distribution and bringing teams together and things like that. And I think the other element I would add to this as well is personas, in that if you've got various different stakeholders right back at the beginning that Steve talked about, align your demos with personas. So have a representative that is the IT desk, and somebody else who's in the business, Bill, who's a manager of the team, or whatever it happens to be. So make sure that when you create a story, that you give it to the vendor, get them to copy it, but use
Yeah.
personas within your own organizations, so that if you're running the demo, they recognize, oh, that's what Bill's going to see, right? Because that's a big difference, rather than
Yes.
somebody tell you the John Doe from X is welcome. Here's John. Oh, he doesn't exist in my company. We're not structured like that. So make sure not only to follow your own processes, but to put your own personas in there so that people can understand, oh, right, you mean that? Oh, that's facilities, right? Or we don't call it facilities, we call it maintenance. Or, you know, that and minor changes in terminology can also confuse people. So if you can use your own terminology and your own personas as well as your own workflows, everybody will understand what they're looking at and what they will get from the tool. Hugely, hugely important. And as I say, I'm going to reiterate, do not let the vendor just go down a pre-canned route. They will have something that shows their product to the best of its ability. And if they swing even slightly from that story, everything will fall apart.
Yeah,
So,
indeed.
you know, make them do it. Get your money's worth from any demo, and make sure that they are following your instructions, not theirs. And we'll need to move quite quickly. Conducting direct financial comparisons. Very, very difficult. I would
Really
say
difficult.
almost impossible.
Yep.
Because, but let's pick out things to look out for when you're looking at direct comparisons, because the first thing that comes to me is total cost of ownership. So many people are totally focused upon what they're purchasing at day one, that they forget that if it's a SaaS product, right, they're paying the same amount year after year. You need to make sure that that value is not going to go up, so that there's not something in the contract that says we can put it up 20% every year, because some people do.
They do.
So
some of the really big names do.
They do. And then additional modules. Just because you've seen something work, let's say that major incident management process, have they forgotten to tell you that you have to pay X number of extra pounds for Microsoft Teams integration, or for any other integration for that matter? Is it a different module when suddenly you're looking at ITOM, for instance?
Indeed.
So when they've done this incident management process, they've shown you this wonderful orchestration where what happens as part of it is it rolls out a bit of software that fixes a problem and updates it all. And do you need extra modules for all of these? How much do they cost? How much do they cost to implement? How much is it going to cost you to upgrade your system if it's got upgrades? Maybe the cost is nothing. Maybe it isn't. Maybe you do have to pay for the upgrade. Even if you don't, you have to have time on your side of the organization built in, which is a cost for the upgrade. So total cost of ownership is more about more than just the one-off year one cost of SaaS or purchase of software.
Think about ongoing training as well, and that managed service piece I alluded to earlier on. You need to think of all the different constituent parts. It isn't just the user license cost, P times Q. Doesn't work like that.
Training is a good one as well, because some of these products do take masses of training. You have to go through on-site training, or off-site if it's you. Send a whole bunch of people. They come back, they're fully trained up, and then they bugger off to a different company where they can earn a bit more money. So just as a top tip, be careful of those sort of things as well, and factor them in, because if they disappear, you have to get somebody else in. So look at the cost of those resources if there is a very high technical level of training required to actually run the product. So that's one I would look out for. Opportunities to consolidate. He says consolidating our last 5 minutes.
Yeah, so let's not dwell on this one for too long, but there might well be, opportunities to roll pricing up somewhere in the response, to roll functionality together, to consolidate existing tools that you have, and bring that functionality in. So, for example, you might be paying for your ITSM tool, but you might be paying also for some BI software to produce some reports for you. And in fact, that can be done natively by a new tool, and therefore you don't need to buy those licenses too. So think about those things. It isn't just a straight swap in a lot of cases. Given some of the functionality that most of the tools are able to achieve now, there are massive opportunities potentially to consolidate under one single tool license.
Yeah, and I think what I would add to that as well is a lot of these tools now can go beyond ITSM, traditional ticketing as well.
Mm.
So,
Mm.
you can look at HR and finance and facilities and various other departments. So
Yep.
you can think about consolidation. So even at day one, if you're not thinking we want to do that at day one, then
Mm.
look at the potential opportunities for consolidating down the line, because nearly always that will involve more money. But if you've
Yep.
got a pot there that says, okay, we can get rid of the facilities software that we are paying for by stretching out this software to cover that area. There are a few gotchas in there about things that would appear to work across multiple areas, but actually don't work so well. But we don't have time to get into that
Not a
today.
day.
But look for opportunities to consolidate. And now the last one, number 10.
Yeah, we'll come back onto this, won't we, in one of the subsequent episodes. But yeah, when you get the response back from the service provider, a bit like buying a car, really, don't accept the first quote. That's what they want you to do. But we'll explain why next time.
We will explain why next time. And I would say it's not so much like buying a car now, because if you go to buy a car, all the costs are there on the internet. You can see them all.
True.
If you go to most service desk vendors,
No,
you will
good point.
find that there's a ball of wool surrounding all of their costings. And it's a bit
Yeah.
like when we say to some sort of process consultants, you ask them a question and they say, it depends.
Yeah.
Same answer. How much does it cost?
I've given
It
that answer
depends.
so many times. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Martin.
Right.
I've just noticed the time. I've got a couple of minutes. We ought to wrap this up, I think. People will be finished their lunch by now.
Yep, let's wrap. So don't worry, I've not lost Steve totally. He's in the green room at the moment, but what we've got here is a couple of contact details for me. If we're not already connected on LinkedIn, you can scan this QR code. That'll take you to my LinkedIn page. I don't connect with everybody in the world, but I'd love to connect with anybody who's looking at these episodes, so please do that. I am also a Freshworks partner. If you'd like a sort of independent view on software tools, my goal is always to give people the answers that they're looking for rather than necessarily the corporate answers. So if you're thinking of a new tool and Freshworks is in the frame in any way, shape or form, please contact me first. If you go directly to the company, then you'll not get to speak to me. So I would love to speak to people. You'll always get an honest answer from me. I don't tell anybody or don't recommend software that's not right for you. Steve.
Hello, right, and at the top here, that's my LinkedIn profile. So give that a scan and connect with me. It'd be great to connect with you on LinkedIn, and you can message me and ask any specific questions. And then on the little white QR code at the bottom there, that's the 10 tips that we've been going through today. A little bit more detail on it on the website. So take a click on that one and fill your boots with ITSM tool tips wholesomeness.
And finally, folks, we have also got a YouTube channel. So we've already done 3 hours worth of us talking about ITSM maturity assessments. Go scan that. And we'd love you to go subscribe as well. This session will also go up there. So there will be more and more coming at all times onto that YouTube channel. I'll be delighted to see anybody subscribing, but there's some great content, and thank you for those who have come up and are looking at the session. Hopefully more of you will join in next time. So thanks, Jerry. Thanks for coming along. And maybe we'll see you in the next episode. We'll probably follow this up with just a few links in a LinkedIn message to where you can get further information, just in case you haven't sat there and scanned all the QR codes and things like that. And we'll also give you a link to the next show. But that's us, bang on 1 o'clock. We've done an hour. We were meant to do 45 minutes. I don't know, but we've done another hour. Nothing new there. So cheerio from Edinburgh. Take it easy.
Cheerio
guys.
from Essex.
See you next
Thanks,
time.
everyone.